So we've gone from talking about how you create community and create experience. Now we're going to look at how you design in-game ad placements. And I'm really excited about this because I went and downloaded the book. We have Nathan Bell. He is AdInMo game designer with a wealth of practical knowledge, a really fascinating portfolio, I have to say as well, Nathan, and a very cool guide about designing in-game play brand ads. So I think we just want to sit back and absorb this one, Nathan. I will give it to you. And again, great work on what you've been doing so far. So bring it on.
Okie doke. Thank you. Good afternoon, ladies and gents. My name is Nathan Ball, Head of Game Design at AdInMo. And today I'm going to be talking to you about how to design in-gameplay ad placements. This guy here is not me, but he does look suspiciously like me, considering he was just a random Google image result for design. So, food for thought. So before I get into it, I'm going to be giving you kind of 8 tips based on my experience with designing in-gameplay ads today. But first, a bit of background. So who we are AdInMo. We're an ad tech company, and we provide an in-gameplay ad integration service for mobile game developers. We do this through our SDK, which is free to download on our website and is compatible with both the Unity and Unreal game engines. And you can use that SDK to put in gameplay ads into your mobile games. So before we get into designing them, I mean, what even are in-gameplay ads? They're a relatively new phenomenon. Not everyone will have heard of them, so I'll just go over a bit what exactly they are. And the best way to do that, I've found, is to talk about them in the context of traditional mobile ads. So I have a couple examples of those here. And these are the kind of ads that you'll have seen everywhere. If you're involved at all with mobile games, you've got your classic banner ads and interstitial video ads. And just looking at these two pictures, the issues with these kind of ads become immediately apparent. So you've got Angry Birds over here, great game, lovely art style. And then you got this ad just kind of sitting right on top of it. It doesn't mesh visually. It's blocking part of the screen. It just doesn't synergize with the game that it's sitting on top of at all. It visually disrupts the experience for the player. And over here, you've got your interstitial video. I mean, you don't even know what game it originally was. I mean, you're literally in a different experience than you were a few seconds ago when you were playing the game. You're not playing the game. You're watching something from a different game. Again, the experience is being disrupted. And in-gameplay ads are very much a direct response to those issues. So these are ads that are built into the games themselves rather than being layered on top of them or interrupting them. So we've got some examples here: ads on billboards, ads kind of around the edges of sports stadiums, ads on trailing banners on the sides of planes. These are all examples of locations in games where you can place in-gameplay ads, anywhere that makes sense, really. And these will generate revenue in a similar but not exactly the same fashion as traditional ads. We'll get to that in a second. And we recently ran a consumer survey where we asked consumers to compare these kinds of ads with traditional ads side by side. And 70% of them said that these ads provided a smoother gaming experience, which is exactly what we're going for. Less disruptive, more streamlined, more in the game. So why would you want to monetize with in-gameplay ads? There's kind of 3 main reasons. First of all, as I mentioned, they're non-disruptive. With in-gameplay ads, you're making money, but the player is also always in your game. That's not always the case with interstitial videos, etc. They're getting taken out of the experience, experiencing something else for a bit. These ads keep you in the game, keep you playing, and make you money at the same time. They also help maintain immersion much easier. As I mentioned before, the art style of a lot of traditional ads doesn't mesh at all with most games. And that can be the case with in-gameplay ads as well, but since they're objects within your game, you have a lot more options in terms of blending them in, making them feel more natural, which we'll get onto a bit later. And thirdly, they also add new revenue opportunities that you just didn't have before. There are limits to traditional ads, and they exist on top of the screen, they exist as videos, but there's a lot of space in between that you can't take advantage of with them, but you can with in-gameplay ads. And we're actually launching a new developer survey this week. Link should be down in the chat below. My colleague should be posting that right about now. And one of the most telling statistics from that was this question here. We asked developers what their top 3 features are when they're integrating with a monetization platform. And the clear winner, this blue bar here, was that it doesn't interrupt gameplay. And that's exactly what our ads do. They deliver advertising without compromising on gameplay. And now, one more thing, there's a lot of background here, but I think it's important. In-gameplay ads work quite differently to traditional ads. And before we talk about how you design them, I think it's important to talk about how they work, because that does inform a lot of the design process. So in-gameplay ads don't generate revenue based on click-through, like with banner ads, but rather they generate it based on kind of screen time and views. So in order to generate ads, an in-gameplay ad has to generate impressions. And to do that, the ad needs to be on screen for a certain amount of time, at a certain size, and at a certain angle to the player. And if all three of those criteria are met, then an impression is generated, and those impressions translate directly into revenue. So yeah, it's a bit different, and it does inform a lot of how you design these. So here we are, got through the background, time for the main course. So as I said, there's going to be 8 tips. I've split these up into technical and artistic tips, because there really is 2 sides to in-gameplay ad design. There's getting the ads to work and work the best they can in terms of generating revenue for you. And there's also the artistic side, as in blending them in, making them feel natural and organic. So I'll cover both of these, starting with the technical side. So tip number 1 is to place ads where your players spend the most time. This is a fairly obvious one when you consider that as an ad generates more money the longer it's on screen for. So you want to be placing your ads on screens where players are going to be spending a lot of time. Now, as a developer, you probably have numerous tools for identifying this, but like analytics, etc. And if you don't know these things, then some good examples are character customization screens, main menu screens, level selects, those kind of things. So either screens where the player spends a lot of time on them all at once, like a character creation screen, or screens that the player will be returning to throughout their time with the game, like with main menus, level selects, etc. Tip number 2 is to take advantage of static screens. Now, one of the difficulties with in-gameplay ads when you're integrating them is in 3D games or games where the player has freedom of movement in a kind of 3D space, it can be tricky because their movement's unpredictable and they might not go exactly where you want, and you may not get impressions of your ads because they might move in such a way that the ad is slightly off screen, it's slightly not big enough, etc. So it can be tricky designing with those. Which is why static screens are such a blessing, because there's no chance of that happening if the player is not able to move about. Then you're guaranteed impressions for as long as that screen is on the screen. They're very consistent and guaranteed. So some examples of these are kind of menu screens, and a lot of puzzle games tend to feature their entire puzzles on a single screen. So those are great candidates for in-gameplay ads for that reason. Tip number 3 is to reuse ad placement keys in fast-moving games. So the way it works is you have the SDK that you download, and you also have the AdInMo developer portal, and you kind of work across both of these things in order to place your placements. So you generate a placement key in the portal, you bring that over into the SDK and your game engine, you apply that to your ad placement, and that is how the ads are delivered programmatically into your game. You can give different ad placements the same placement key, and if you do that, then those placements will show the same ad during the play session every time. And this also allows them to generate impressions cumulatively as well. So what this means is if one placement, like in this example here, got a racing game with a bunch of billboards around the edge, if this billboard was only on screen for like half a second or something and it didn't meet the time criteria for an impression, the next one coming up could fulfill the rest of it, and together those 2 placements would generate an impression for you. This is really important actually in a lot of games, because there's a lot of fast-moving mobile games, endless runners, driving games, etc. And oftentimes you need to employ this tip to generate a good number of impressions. There is also an artistic application for this as well. If you just want visual consistency and coherence across your game, you can give them all the same placement key, and it's guaranteed that they'll all show the same ad. If that's something you're looking for, you can achieve it with this as well. Tip number 4 is to think about the player's path through your game. So this is kind of similar to the first tip. If you're developing like a shooter game or something, or a 3D game, and you're kind of tied into the community, you'll know these things like the paths the players take. You've probably set up the old design tricks, arrows painted on walls, trails of coins, power-ups, etc. And you know that the player is more likely to take those routes than other routes. But once you've identified these routes, then it's great to place your ads kind of on and around those routes, because those areas get more attention than others. And so the placements on them will get more attention as well, and you'll generate more impressions and thus revenue from that. Okay, so moving on to the artistic side now. Tip number 5 is to consider your game's world. This is usually the first thing I do when I'm looking at a new game to integrate in-gameplay ads in, is to really think about where the game is set, when it's set as well, time period, very important. And just consider the environment, the style, the location, because ultimately the point of in-gameplay ads is to place them where they make sense, because if they're just placed randomly, then they're almost as disruptive as banner ads that don't make sense. You want them to make sense. And the easiest way to do that is to think about your game's world and where in that world it would make sense to feature ads. Now, this is easier in some cases than others. In this example here, this is an urban setting. And in real life, there are ads everywhere in urban settings, posters on walls, billboards, sides of bus shelters, etc. There's no shortage of options in that case. But, you know, there are a lot of mobile game genres out there. Maybe your game's a medieval fantasy RPG, and there's not immediately obvious where ads would come into that. I mean, they wouldn't have been in the actual time period, but there are still ways to place them that will make sense to the player if they suspend their disbelief a little bit. So maybe on this wooden signs, the side of barrels, crates, etc., the kind of objects that would have existed in that time that do make sense to be branded. So yeah, just give it a lot of thought, because I think this is one of the most key parts of placing in-gameplay ads. Tip number 6 is to make use of background layers. Most games feature background layers to some extent or another. These are just kind of static, kind of mostly pieces of art in the background there to provide context for the game. They don't tend to play a role in gameplay at all. And those two things mean that they're perfect for placing ads on, because you can put ads there and not worry that the gameplay will be compromised because the background isn't really a part of it. Also, backgrounds tend to be visible for the duration of levels. And that means that any ads placed there will get a good amount of screen time and therefore generate you a good amount of revenue as well. Tip number 7 is to add new game objects to support your ads. Now, this is something I think will become quite a big thing as in-gameplay advertising develops, and I think it really is the direction it's headed in. So just a bit of background, not every game has good locations for in-gameplay ads in it. It's just a fact, unfortunately, but you can create opportunities for yourself to place ads by adding new assets to your game to support them. As an example, this game over here, there's this plane with a trailing banner with an ad on it. Now, that's a great integration. It's a very dynamic ad experience for the player, but none of this was in the game originally. The developer added this plane and banner, etc., after development to support the ad. And the result is a great ad experience for players and an additional opportunity for ad placements for the developer. This just didn't exist before he did that. It lets you develop both your game's world and your ad strategy in a single move. So it's quite efficient in that regard. It does work best early in development. It's great if at the GDD stage, you can be thinking about this, like, well, we'll add these objects to support ads. They make sense in our world and they'll let us generate some more revenue. But it's very much doable post-development as well. As I said, this example, the developer did add this after development was done, and it worked out fine. So yeah, it's a very key thing, I think, moving forward, the addition of new game objects to support ads. And finally, tip number 8 is to use visual effects to blend your ads into your game. Now, this is one of the big things that you can't do with traditional mobile ads, but you can with in-gameplay ads. Since they are actual objects within your game, you can apply effects like shaders, lighting effects, etc., to them that you just couldn't do to sort of over-the-top traditional ads. And that means you can blend them in to your game so they feel a lot more natural. Like in this example here, you've got a kind of dimly lit city street, and this ad in the background has been adjusted so that it's dimly lit as well, and thus blends in better. You wouldn't have been able to do that with a traditional ad. This ad probably would have been a lot brighter, but because of in-gameplay ads are built into the game, you can adjust that and make it look much more natural. And this just creates a subtler ad experience without compromising your revenue at all. So yeah, that has been 8 tips for placing in-game play ads in your game. I hope you found it interesting. If you did, and we do have a design guide on our website that's free to download that covers similar things in a bit more depth. We have a lot of content on YouTube as well, a series covering different games that have integrated with us, these kind of core principles I've been discussing as well. And finally, if you're a developer watching this, making a mobile game and you think, man, that sounds pretty cool, then give us an email at designclinic@adinmo.com, send us a link to your game, and I'll take a look at it and point out some great locations for in-game play ads in it free of charge. Yeah, so thank you very much for listening. I've been Nathan Ball. Are there
Well,
any
Nathan,
questions?
we're not going to let you go that quickly. You've got a lot of questions here. Do you want to take a couple with us?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, let's do the simple ones first, straightforward. Some people, a number of them anonymous, they have the same question. It's all about the clickability of the ad. And therefore, if you can or can't click them, because if you can't click them on in a game, how do you measure success? So are they clickable, yes or no?
They are not clickable.
Okay.
In terms of how you measure success, I did mention it a few slides back. It's in terms of viewability. So
Okay.
the ad needs to be on screen for like X amount of time, at X size and X angle. And if those 3 criteria are met, then you'll get an impression and that translates into revenue.
All right.
So it's quite different to how traditional ads work.
Okay, so viewability, it's a bit like marketing in outside of mobile games with viewability. So it's a similar approach there. Speaking of approaches, one person, again anonymous, they want to understand, when do they actually approach a company like yours? When should they start thinking about ad placements in the game? The usual answer would be at the very start, but if you can't do it at the very start and you have a game already, you're maybe in development stage. Which stage of development?
Yeah, very start is obviously ideal and it gives you a lot more scope to plan things out. But really any other point in development is fine. A lot of the games that we've worked with so far have been post-development, like the game's already out and we're adding ads into them then, and that's very much doable. The earlier the better though, because if you can sort of build parts of your game around it, it's a lot easier to integrate in gameplay ads into it.
Okay. Another question sort of in that same vein is they just, a few of them here want to understand, okay, so at what point will they be able to work with you, or what point do you work with games rather, to integrate these panels or static screens that you've been showing?
So the way we've been working it so far is we talk to developers. If they're interested, then I'll do an integration document. So I'll have a look at their game, play through it, and then kind of take a bunch of screenshots and point out what I think are good locations based on my experience integrating in the past and just my general designer experience as well. And that's what we do currently.
Couple of questions about understanding the technology, but also understanding the relationship with the brand to advertise in your game. Do you have any tips that you can offer to ensure that you're getting the right ad for your game and vice versa?
Currently, we're not able to kind of guarantee specific types of ads. It's all delivered programmatically, but that is definitely a feature that is on our radar. We know it's something that developers will want, and the ability to kind of filter what kind of ads will be in specific locations in your game. And that's something we're working on and we'll hopefully be getting out soon.
Okay. And a couple of people said, nice talk, great, thank you. And you've got your link to the study you did, the research you did. They also want you to share your other playbooks. I'm hoping you'll do that as well. And wondering, are there certain ads suitable for certain types of games, or are they suitable for all types of games? So is this something that you really want to have maybe in games where, since you're talking about being very non-interruptive, it's not interrupting the gameplay. Maybe it can be for everything also, as long, the mid-core, the hardcore, and not just the sort of the short, snackable, hyper casual games. What would you say? Which genres?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, beyond genre, even, I think the most important factor as to whether these kind of ads fit or not is just the game's environment and its setting. And there are some where they don't make a lot of sense, but there are loads where they do. And as I mentioned, you can add additional objects to fit them in better. There's not really a limit. They can go into games of any genre type, casual, hardcore, midcore, etc. Just it really comes down to the individual game. And often you'd be surprised where ads can fit. You might just not have thought of some of the locations they can go.
Mm-hmm. You've showed some examples here. I guess they want some other examples. I don't know, maybe you can just walk us through them. Any that you can blow our minds with implementations of ad approaches. Are there any that are outstanding or any that you're currently working on?
There's a few good ones. Yeah, we actually have a playlist on our YouTube channel called InGamePlay
Okay.
Review, where I take a look at just kind of the best games that have integrated with us and point out the kind of why it's so good, like what they've done, how they've designed them. That's up on our YouTube channel. If Kevin could pop a link to that in the chat, that'd be great. So there's some great examples in there. Recently, we worked with a game called Snakes and Ladders 3D, which is set in like a jungle environment, playing a classic board game. Neither of those things sound like you'd be able to fit ads in there, but they actually did really well. They kind of placed them as wooden signs, and they had them consistently throughout different parts of the game, and it created this really consistent ad identity. So like, because they're signed in different screens, they kind of reinforce each other. They make more sense because they appear frequently. And that's something I like to push when I'm giving out these integration docs, is creating a consistent ad identity. And that game did it really well.
Okay. Just to get a feel for this as well in practice, good and bad practice. Let's get back to the metrics for a moment. I've got one question. It makes a lot of sense. It's about viewability and what you've been discussing there as measurements of success. But what should a game aim for?
Yeah, that is a tricky one. There's a lot of nuance to it because these are much more complex than traditional ads. Those kind of have very simple make money or don't states, whereas with these there's a lot of space in between because it depends on the individual integration as well. A game can have loads of our ads placed in it or a few, and depending on how many and how often they show up and how many impressions they generate, the amount of revenue that you'll get from it can fluctuate quite a lot. And the best integrations tend to be the ones that balance the two things really well. I mean, you don't want to flood the game screen with ads, and that will make you a lot of money, but it also goes against kind of the entire point, which is the non-disruptive nature of them. You want them to be blended, and the ideal is one ad that generates impressions consistently because it's on a screen that you spend a lot of time on. And those are the kind of ones I try to recommend the most when I'm doing my recommendations.
So in a perfect world, you're going to have more than one deal, and you're going to have several placements, a lot going on. I'm not sure if you mentioned this. I was live tweeting, so paying a lot of attention, but not always looking at your slides, more like writing about your slides. Anything about the number and the frequency, because that was the thing with with ads in the ordinary sense. It was, how many should I be showing? Should I have some sort of cap? How should I be rotating this? So it was really making certain that you had the right number. Now that will always depend, but this is not really an ad. It's part of the fabric of the game. So do those apply, or are there other ways of looking at the best practice here?
I think they do still apply. I mean, you can still place too many ads like these, and that will compromise your game visually. But I think it is easier to place more because they are built into the game. I mean, if you've got constant interstitial videos, that's just a bad experience. Lots of ads that you walk past, you're still playing the game. I mean, there's a lot of ads going around, but you're still playing the game ultimately. That's what it comes down to. Yeah, I do still recommend restraint usually. I don't, flooding out with ads is not going to look great. And as I've said, you want your game to be looking good if you're using these kind of ads. That's the big point.
Mm-hmm. It's so important to use, as you said, to follow the user journey. And we have a couple of people who are wondering a bit more about that context. I mean, it's probably very important what data you have to understand your audience, but also understand that journey. And you're going to need multiple journeys for multiple types of players as well. Anything you can offer in the way of the high level advice around, making this an effective journey, but also sort of an emotionally interesting journey. So it's a little bit not just about the behavioral data or the straight data, but also the psychographics and understanding, what goes where in the journey. And, it's a bit more complex than early in the day when it was very simple. It was just like have ads when there are moments of accomplishment and glee and happiness, and everyone will say, hey, this is great, I'll look at an ad now. But again, you're not that type of ad. So I can have you at different places. It opens up a lot of opportunities, but I think that's what some of the people in the audience are concerned about. You can do anything. What can I do? So again, that's sort of that in the journey. Any thoughts about where it fits, where it doesn't? Because it's a totally different type of experience, and you want to keep it, as you said, consistent, contextual, but also fun.
Yeah, I suppose that's quite an interesting question, actually. Usually when I'm recommending ads and thinking about where they go, it's more about just kind of authenticity than player journey. Like if an ad would make sense there, then that's usually where I'll go for. It's not so much about which point in the experience. Although, of course, having an ad at like a big moment or that kind of thing can kind of weigh it down. I think that's less so with ads like these because they're not over the top, they're not interrupting, they're just there. And ideally, in a lot of cases, the players don't even notice them. They're just sitting there generating revenue quietly in the background. So yeah, I think it's more about the location and authenticity than the player experience, although obviously that is very important to consider as well.
And the quality. It's interesting with the fading and the background and trying to make it really part of the fabric of the game. Is that the case that a lot of designers, they have to rethink this very drastically to include that? I'm not certain if what's the heavy lifting, I guess, is a final question for you, Nathan, before you go, of really having this not just integrated, because I can go to AdInMo and I can figure that out. I'm talking about the design, the creativity. I mean, this was at some point someone's baby, and now they have to change it. Is there a lot of heavy lifting involved there, or even for that matter, sitting down with the creative team and saying, hey guys, let's have a talk here. It's all okay, but we're going to have to redo some stuff. What is that like? What is that process like?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely is more involved than with traditional ads, because as I mentioned, there is an actual creative process that goes along with this. You're not just kind of popping them in at specific intervals. You are placing them into your game. I mean, I think the fact that you have that scope for designing them literally is very valuable. And you can do this to a greater or lesser extent, depending on, how far you want to go with it. Like not everyone does blend their ads in. But the developers that do, they look better. They feel more integrated. So there's a lot of kind of options, really. But the fact that you have those options is really one of the big advantages of this format.
Excellent. Well, there are questions there. We have to move on, but maybe you'll stick around in
I'll be on
afterwards.
On the Discord if anyone wants to ask any more questions.
Perfect. Absolutely. Well, thank you, Nathan. It was really a pleasure, and thank you for sharing. And also those links that we have in chat, if anyone wants to make a note of them. I've already pulled them off someplace and I'm going to check them out later. So thanks again.
Thank you very much.